at the Forefathers Monument in Plymouth, Massachusetts on actually a beautiful day. And I'm here with Mr. Leo Martin, who is an amazing tour guide. And he's going to tell us really what the monument stands for, what it's all about, and really why a lot of us don't even hear too much about it. Okay, Leo, so tell us the opening about the plaque you wanted to mention.
When we look at the Forefathers Monument, we look at the faith story of the Pilgrims, which translates into the faith story of our country. Our country was formed on biblical principles, and we need to get that word out here in Plymouth, and that's what we do with the Forefathers Monument. You may know that a few years ago, Kirk Cameron was here and filmed a movie called Monumental about this monument, and that has brought some attention to it, but we need to bring more to it. It's incredibly important that the people know the faith story of our country. The people know that actually civil liberty and religious liberty were tied together. They were never separate. When you look at the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, it was never written in either document that the church should be separated. It was written that they should be together. Thomas Jefferson, the president at the time, wrote a letter to the Danbury Baptist Church in Danbury, Connecticut, telling them, when they asked him, what happens when the federal government interferes with the way we worship? He said it will never happen. There's a wall of separation between church and state to separate the church from the state and protect the church from the state, not the state from the church. You cannot have a civil government without a religious government. They have to be tied together. And when you look at the Forefathers Monument, it says it right there. The National Monument to the Forefathers, erected by a grateful people in remembrance of their labors, sacrifices, and sufferings for the cause of civil and religious liberty. They are tied together. John Adams, second President of the United States, said this about the Constitution: it was written for a moral and religious person. It is wholly inadequate for anyone else. You have to have a change on the inside. You have to have a spiritual uplift inside for our republic to work, for it to be run by the people, not by the king.
That makes sense. It really does. Tell us about what this means here, too, this little plaque. Who gave them this plaque?
I can barely even see the plaque.
It says the National Monument to the Forefathers was added to the National Register of Historic Places by the National Park Service. The Department of the Interior in September 1974, the monument, designed by Hyannis Billings of Boston, was erected by the Pilgrim Society in 1889. It possesses exceptional value in commemorating and illustrating the history of the United States.
That's right. This statue is owned by the state of Massachusetts. They're the one that takes care of the land and takes care of the statue. They need a little help, evidently. And what we're doing is we're raising money to restore the monument for the year 2020. That would be our 400th anniversary. Okay. But a man by the name of Hyannis Billings did design this monument. He is an architect from Boston, a good Christian man. His favorite book of the Bible was Revelation. In his work, you do see a lot of revelation in it, and it was constructed by the Mayflower Society. What happened is they put out to bid, or they made a contest to a bunch of architects to bring a design to build the Forefathers Monument. 2 architects from New York sent in their design, and one of those 2 won the contest, in which he was paid a little prize for winning it. The day before that contest was over, Hyannis Billings came to them and said, not only will I build this monument, I'll build the portico over Plymouth Rock, and I will raise the money for both.
Whoa.
So they gave the prize to the man from New York who won, and then gave the contract to Hyannis Billings, who designed and had the monument built.
That's amazing.
He's a great guy. Not only was he a good Christian man, but he was an abolitionist. Hyannis Billings actually did the drawings for the original Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Oh, wow. It's amazing. Walking with Leo is like walking with a history book. All right, so Leo, where should we start out? Where would be the best place to start in describing the monument?
Well, in describing it, it would be good here, but what we have on the Forefathers Monument are 5 statues and 1 monument. And what we have is different governances. Our Pilgrims were the product of the Reformation. when they went through the Reformation, their pastor John Robinson discovered that they no longer needed a priest or a king or a bishop to intercede between them and God, that they could talk to God themselves. When they started reading the Bible, they felt they could converse with God. In other words, they could pray.
Right.
But not only that, they felt God talk back to them. It was a two-way conversation.
Yes.
So now that they're having a two-way conversation with God, they believe they have a relationship with God.
Right.
So their faith has changed. It's different.
Yes.
You no longer need an intercessor between you and God. You're talking to him yourself. Your
Right.
faith definitely will change.
Yes.
But we also had a little problem back then with a guy in England by the name of King James. He was the King of England and the head of the Anglican Church. So when he set the law in England, he set it for everybody. Everybody sat under the same rule of law in England except King James. He was above the law. He didn't have to sit under his own law. Not only that, if you belonged to his church, the Anglican Church, and you wanted to pray, knock your lights out, pray all day long. As long as the subject of your prayer was King James. He thought he was God. Oh yeah, well, Pastor
realize.
Robinson had just a little problem with that.
I can imagine.
Oh yeah, so he took his folks out of the Anglican Church and they had church in their homes. In other words, they separated from the Church of England. That's why the Pilgrims are called separatists.
Okay.
Another group back then, exactly the same theologically, stayed in the Anglican Church and tried to purify it from within. We call them the Puritans. They founded Boston 10 years later. But when John Robinson did that, he never wanted to see one person in charge of everything ever again, so he made his congregation elect him pastor, not appoint him.
Right.
Appoint him, you can't get rid of him. Elect him, you can dump him. Oh yeah. But what does that do? It eliminates the king.
Yeah.
Now everybody's equal under the law because we elect our officials and we can get rid of them. Change the world. And the first document of self-rule in our country was the Mayflower Compact, written in Provincetown Harbor when we elected John Carver, the first freely elected official in our country, because we honored the individual, not the king. You see, what happened when they read the Bible, they found this little thing in the Old Testament called the Dominion Charter. We are to take dominion over the earth, of all the animals, the fish, the birds, the things that creep and crawl, but not each other.
Right.
We are not to take dominion over each other. We are all made in the image of God. We are all equal in the sight of God.
Right.
Not equal talents, not equal gifts, but equal under the law.
Right.
In other words, God honored the individual.
Yes.
If he did, we should. So now what the Pilgrims are doing is they're ruling from the bottom up instead of the top down. The leaders are responsible to the people, not the people to the leaders. But not only from the bottom up, from the inside out.
Right.
Because I've had that change on the inside, their faith. Statue of faith.
Right.
Their moral standard is now different. It's no longer King James's moral standard, it's God's. They've lifted it to a new level. Morality, the first two statues on the monument. Internal governances that reflect who you are from the inside out, because whoever you are on the inside is going to reflect who you are on the outside, and that will affect all the other governances, law, education, and liberty. So when Emmett Billings built the statue, he began with the inward governances, faith that brought the Pilgrims from Plymouth to start a new life and to set a new moral standard. So when we talk about it, we talk about faith first, looking out at the exact route the Pilgrims took when they came in from Europe to start a new life, and then we go talk to morality.
All right. Let's go over that side. So, Leo, we're on this side now of the statue that's called morality. And there's a beautiful engraving over my head here. Why don't you explain to us, Leo, what this is all about here?
Okay, in the all the smaller statues around faith, we have a representation of both the Old and New Testament. Pilgrims didn't believe the New Testament eliminated the Old Testament. They believed it completed it. So we see both in what they did. And when you look at the young lady up there, morality, you'll see she has the Ten Commandments in one hand, the law from the Old Testament, and rolled up in her lap is the scroll of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, Emmett Billings' favorite, and by the way, the first book of the Bible translated to Wycliffe for the Indians. And underneath each one of these statues, we have what's called an alto relief. It's a part of the Pilgrims' lives. This part of their life was when they left Holland and came back to England and met the Mayflower to come over here. We call that the embarkation. And when we already talked about their faith and their morality and their change on the inside, what happened then with these people is that they, well, look, I know some of you folks are people of faith, you enjoy going to church. Our Pilgrims went to church 8 hours every Sunday.
Wow.
Not even I enjoy going to church that much. But for the first 4 hours, they would listen to a sermon. For the second 4 hours, they would talk about it with each other and the elders to get more information on what God was saying to them for that day. They followed what God said to them to the rule. They took everything God, and that day they put it into effect. They called that prophecy, listening to God. And when they saw God working in their lives and the result of it, they referred to that as the providence of God. So when we look at an alto relief like this, they're leaving Holland, coming to England to meet their friends. They've been in Holland for 12 years. They're a close, tight-knit community. They're actually leaving their friends and family, knowing they're taking a trip that could make them not ever see their friends again.
Yes,
And they
that's
never
true.
did see John Robinson again. He died before he could get here. And look at the grief on these people.
Oh,
Look at the sadness up there.
it's amazing.
That grief was real. They're leaving their friends, but the point is this, they did it anyway. Because in those sessions of prophecy, they felt God speaking to them, saying they had to come over here and start a new life based on the Bible. So rather than succumb to the grief, they took the grief and they came anyway.
That's remarkable. Absolutely amazing. So Leo, why don't you explain to us what this side of the monument actually means with all these names?
This is half of the people that came on the Mayflower. And on the other side of the statue is the other half of the people that came on the Mayflower. Now, 102 people came. 51 died the first winter. And I just told you over there, the Pilgrims honor the individual. The problem I have talking to people is when I introduce them to the Mayflower passengers, there's names they're familiar with. Miles Standish,
Right.
Governor Carver, Governor Bradford. All these names roll off the tongue, but there's names you've never heard before. And these people came over, half of them died, and nobody will ever know who they are.
Right.
So when I tell people that, they look at me and say, how in the world does that honor the individual? They did exactly what God asked them to do. They came over here, they lost their lives, and nobody will know who they are. The point is this, they honor the individual. They sacrificed themselves for their friends. That first February, there were 7 pilgrims healthy enough to take care of everybody else. But those 7 didn't go over and take care of themselves. They took care of their friends. They put their lives at risk. Of the 18 married women that came on the Mayflower, 14 died the first winter. They sacrificed themselves for the next generation, knowing if they did not do that, that generation, that they would not survive. They put their lives at risk for their families. They honored the individual. That is the point.
Wow, that's amazing.
And since they honored the individual, the simple result is the country we have today.
Right. Wow, Leo, that is tremendous. All right, Leo, so why don't you tell us what this side of the monument means and this amazing picture over us? This is incredible.
But we just looked at faith and morality, those 2 inward governance. This is the first external governance, law. You cannot have a society without the rule of law. And the Pilgrims did things differently, as we've already discovered. They ruled from the bottom up instead of the top down. It was no longer the king in charge, but the people in charge. Everybody was equal under the law, because as we discovered, when they looked at that Dominion Charter, God honored the individual. We're all made in the image of God. So when you look at that gentleman, you see he has books in his hands. Those are the books of the common law, the law that touches us the most deeply. And that law says we are all the same under the law. And when we look at this statue, we also have 2 small statues on the sides. One depicts, on this one depicts justice and one depicts mercy. Our Pilgrims had a law with justice and mercy. What does that mean? The punishment equaled the crime. Back in England in the 1600s, if you were tried for a crime, one judge would convict you, another judge would set the punishment.
Okay.
They would have nothing to do with each other, and most of the time the punishment was much worse than what the crime was. It never equaled.
Right.
Not in Plymouth. Our punishment equaled the crime. I'll give you an example. Did you folks know that the first duel in the United States took part in Plymouth, Massachusetts, between 2 men who came on the Mayflower? A man named Doughty and a man named Lester. And naturally, they were fighting over the attentions of a young woman. What else? Well, they weren't great duelists. They nicked each other a little bit, no big deal, but they did break the law. So Governor Bradford punished them by tying their hands and feet behind them and together for 24 hours. Well, if you've ever seen a person in that position, as your hands and feet get tired, they begin to drop and they pull. The pain is incredible. They begged for mercy after 1 hour. Governor Bradford gave it to them, and they never dueled again. However, all they really had to do is ask the young lady. She went back to England, didn't marry either one. What can I tell you, folks? It's a guy thing, you know? Underneath it, we have signing the Mayflower, not the Mayflower Compact, signing the peace treaty with the Indians. In 1621, the Indians and Pilgrims signed a peace treaty that was handwritten. It had 6 points, all pointing to the fact that everybody was equal under the law.
Oh.
You see, folks, the Pilgrims felt if we're going to treat each other equally, we ought to treat the people we touch equally, the Indians. So they wrote that peace treaty, bringing everybody equal under the law. And in 1630, 3 Europeans killed an Indian on the Rhode Island border. 2 of them were captured and brought back to Plymouth for a trial. The gentleman that built our grist mill, John Jenny, was one of the 3 judges that sat in on that trial. Of course, the Indians thought it was going to be a joke, a mock trial, go through the motions, get it over with, let them go. After all they did was kill an Indian.
Right.
John Jenny found the 2 men guilty and had them hung. Everybody was equal under the law. Blew the Indians away, never thought they'd be treated equally. Now they could trust the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were people of character and integrity who lifted that moral standard to that new level. And I firmly believe that is why that is the longest lasting peace treaty in the history of our country. Everybody was equal under the law.
Leo, that's amazing, like the story you were just telling us, you know, about the Indians and the hanging. Why do you think it is that we don't often hear stories like this? They're sort of omitted from when we're in school or wherever.
Education's a big deal. Where you get educated from will set your worldview. And if education changes, your worldview changes. We educate people, we meaning the Pilgrims, from the Bible, biblical principles. If you move away from that and you use something else for your education, you're going to get a different view. And that's what happens sometimes here in Plymouth and other parts of our country. When you change where the education comes from, you change the outcome. If you do not tell these stories, they do not come up, then the outcome is tremendously different.
Right.
Some people may consider that revising history. I do.
Yes.
You tell the right story. We're very fortunate in Plymouth. We have a man that was the governor of Plymouth named William Bradford, who wrote a book called A Plymouth Plantation. We know exactly what happened in Plymouth. It is written down.
Yes.
And everything in that book is based on faith. Now, you can try to take it out and change it, but it doesn't change the facts.
Right.
And the facts in Plymouth, the people did here, the Pilgrims, did what they did because of their faith in God. That is the story. If you want to change it, you have to eliminate it, and on occasion that happens.
Yes.
But not here. We tell the faith story of the
Wow,
Pilgrims.
I'm glad to hear that, Leo. That's awesome. So what can you tell us, Leo, now for the next part of the monument? What would you say? After the education, what's next?
Well, we do have the Statue of Education over here, which is kind of cool. Unfortunately, Hemet Billings died in the middle of this whole process. It took so long to do it, and he couldn't raise the money. He was dead. So every different group of people raised different monies for different statues. The Statue of Faith, the money was raised by Governor Ames, the governor of Massachusetts. Law, the Connecticut lawyers raised the money for law, and all the children put in their money together and paid for the Statue of Education.
Whoa, that's amazing.
We'll go over here, we can take a look at that.
Okay, so Leo, here we are over the section called Education. Tell us how this really came about with the Pilgrims, and what actually is the difference, would you say, today as opposed to back then when it comes to education?
Well, education is a big deal for the Pilgrims. And when a lot of people come to Plymouth, they don't think it is.
Right.
You see, we have this little thing going on with a place called Jamestown. I'm sure you've heard of Jamestown. The beef we have with Jamestown is they say they were first, we say we were first. Well, technically they were. We're the first continuous community. What did we do differently? We brought women. I know that sounds odd, but Jamestown did not. Did you know Jamestown did not have women for 12 years? They went there to strike it rich. We came here to build a society, and us Pilgrim men, we're so darn smart, we knew we couldn't do it without women. How sharp are we, huh? But not only that, folks, we brought children, absolutely unheard of. But if you're going to build a society, you bring the cornerstone, the family. We did. It worked.
Yes.
Unfortunately, when I tell folks that, they assume our children were uneducated because we did not have a formal school, and we didn't. We didn't have enough children. But believe me, they were well educated. They learned at home. Their parents taught them. They actually had a textbook back then. We call that textbook the Bible today. They had supplementary materials. Governor Bradford himself brought over 400 books with him on the Mayflower. The governor could speak 5 languages. See if I can put this education thing in perspective. Right down the street a little ways, right here in Massachusetts, there's another little institution that was built the same year our grist mill was built, 1636. You may have heard of it. We call it Harvard University. Harvard was founded when a young man named John Harvard donated his library to start that university. William Bradford brought more books with him on the Mayflower than John Harvard donated to Harvard University. Kind of puts things in perspective.
It does.
Education's a big deal. You see, because when you take education and you change it, you change the outcome of the country. You
Yes.
change the outcome of your children. And once you remove them from the education coming from the Bible, that education is going to change and it will be watered down.
Yes.
Education was so important that the Pilgrims felt if they didn't pass that information from generation to generation, they would have some big problems. And they were right. And believe it or not, underneath education is the signing of the Mayflower Compact. Why would that be under education? Simply because of the biblical principle of the Dominion Charter that we are not to be over one another. We're all equal under the law. And that is the first document of self-rule in our country. Written on the Mayflower in Provincetown Harbor in 1620, electing John Carver the first freely elected official in our country because of the biblical principle that everybody is equal under the law.
Yes. That's
So
amazing.
we put that under education. Education is so important. And that is why I today believe the homeschooling movement is going to change our country. It's going to
Yes.
save it if our country is going to be saved because they're being taught the right education.
Exactly. That's really amazing, Leo. Wow. That is so incredible. Boy, I have to say this, folks, you know what? If you have really never seen the Forefathers Monument, you really need to come to Plymouth to just see. This is such a beautiful tribute to the Pilgrims. I'm just in awe. I feel like a little mouse next to it. It's so big. And it's in a residential area, and definitely you've got to look up Leo. He is an amazing historian. All right, so we're on this other side of the statue right now, and it has more names here. Leo's going to tell us what these names mean as well. What are these names all about, Leo, up here?
Well, of course, it's the other half of the passengers that came on the Mayflower, and the first top 3 names are the first 3 governors of Plymouth. But the interesting thing you might notice after that is William Brewster, the elder of the church, and you just might notice what he named his sons. William Brewster named his sons Love and Wrestling. He wanted love to love God, he wanted wrestling to wrestle with the devil. And of course my hope is wrestling hung around with Love, so when he got in trouble for being called Love, wrestling was there to help him out. Come down a little further, you might notice Hyannis Hopkins. Hyannis Hopkins was born on the Mayflower halfway across the ocean, so they named the poor guy Hyannis. Peregrine White is up there. He was also born on the Mayflower, and Peregrine means little wanderer or little pilgrim.
Oh.
Yeah. And we also have Humility Cooper. Humility Cooper is a young woman whose parents thought she ought to be humble, so they named her Humility. Hope that worked out, or she had a really rough life. Yeah. Now we'll go over and check out Liberty.
Okay, so we're at the final section of this beautiful, amazing statue. And Leo, tell us a little bit about it. What is this all about, this beautiful plaque and the Liberty Man?
Well, again, we've just gone through our little travels here with the pilgrimage of the Pilgrims, and we went through all the other liberties, and the end of it is liberty. The real thing the Pilgrims were coming here for. They didn't have to come here for religious liberty. They already had that in Holland. And they came for all these other liberties that go with it. The liberties to set their own moral standard, their own rule of law,
Right.
to to educate their children and to find the liberties that come with the Bible. But look at this statue. Look at that man. He's got his helmet
Amazing.
on. He's got a breastplate. He's got his sword. But look at the sword. It's in the defensive position. This battle's over. It's been won.
Right.
He has a lion slain over his shoulder. In the Bible, the lion is a symbol of Satan. In the secular world, tyranny. He has slain the lion. He has slain tyranny. The chains on his hands and feet are broken. They're broken, the chains of tyranny. And on the other side, he's stepping on the chest of the king, having won that battle, broken the chains, and found the peace of the Bible. And that's what the Pilgrim's story is about. That's why they came to Plymouth. They came here to find the peace of the Bible, to overthrow tyranny. You see, their pilgrimage was not a casual walk through life.
No.
It was directional.
Right.
They were seeking the will of God in their lives. And when they discovered that, when they reached the end and they crossed over, they hoped to look God in the eye and hear God say to them, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." They were here to complete God's will here in Plymouth. And if you have just one moment, I'd like to take a look at the quote on the back of this.
All right. This is our last and final stop at the monument, and it is an amazing monument, and I really urge everybody to come out and see this because it's such a part of the heritage that we all grew up with. So, Leo, tell us a little bit about this right now, this plaque that was left by Governor Bradford.
Pilgrims showed up in 1620, 102 people. 51 died the first winter. Yet still, in the first 10 years in Plymouth, they started self-rule, free trade, capitalism, land ownership, all in 10 years. And in 10 years later, in 1630, when Mass Bay showed up, that would be Boston, they came with over 1,000 people, but no doctor. Our doctor, Sam Fuller, was there helping them out, and while he was there, he discovered they were still ruling from the top down, not the bottom up. So he suggested that they change what they did and start ruling the other way, and they finally did. Then our whole country did. So we in Plymouth do credit Sam Fuller and those 51 people for the way we are governed today. But so did William Bradford, the second governor of Plymouth, because in 1630 he wrote this quote, "Thus out of small beginnings greater things have been produced by his hand, that made all things of nothing and gives being to all things that are. And as one small candle may light 1,000, so the light here kindled has shone unto many, yea, in some sort to our whole nation. Let the glorious name of Jehovah have all the praise." And those lights the governor was talking about are those pilgrims whose lives are shining out to the rest of the country, because just like the Statue of Faith brought the pilgrims in from Europe to start a new life, that quote is facing the rest of our country to let them know the real story of Plymouth. And the real story of Plymouth has nothing to do with buckles or turkey. It has to do with the founding of our country. And our country was founded on Christian principles, and that is good. Because you see, Christianity is inclusive. You do not need to be a Christian to reap the benefits of a Christian society. God did not say all Christians are equal under the law. All people are equal under the law. And my wife and I believe now our job is to be those lights, to shine out to the country, to let them know this is a Christian country, has to stay a Christian country, and it cannot change. Folks, that is the Forefathers Monument.
Wow. Well, Leo, I want to really thank you for just this amazing tour today, and you folks out there as well. You know, look him up. We'll give you the information after this to where you can find his name and address. And also, I want you all to be encouraged that as Christians, really, we do need to say what the truth is. So our nation will return back to the values that it had so many years ago. We want to thank you all for tuning in to the Truth Zone. God bless.